My dad's side of the family is Eastern European, but it's very vague and mysterious, and there's a lot of missing pieces. So for me, I always felt a connection to his side of the family in particular, and I've always been curious about that side of our history. My grandpa has a whole book of family lineage going back to Czech Republic, trying to figure out how we got to where we are. And I've always been curious, like many people, about my roots and what makes up my family and where I come from. And I think that's the reason why I connected to the Russian language in general and to Eastern Europe. So it did inspire a lot of my travels and a lot of my photographic explorations. I'm not so interested in Russia in and of itself. I realized I was more interested in the ideologies that I was searching for, like patriotism and nationalism and youth movements. I felt that by focusing just on Russia, the work could be misinterpreted. When I started publishing the work in the US, I felt that it was too pointed just at Russia. Like, look what Russia's doing, here's what's happening there. That's so crazy, so glad we're not in Russia. And for me as a photographer, that's kind of the opposite point of what I'm trying to say. I don't want to ever other somebody or to create an atmosphere of critique that doesn't point inward at all. So I knew then and there that I had to start doing this work in my own country. Because for me, the parallels and the rhetorics are incredibly similar, and there's nothing crazy that's happening there that's not happening here. It's the same kind of dialogue and conversation, but if we do it here, it's just called patriotism. If they do it in Russia, it's called nationalism. And I think the line between those things is very interesting to me. So I'm not trying to critique any country in general. I'm trying to start a conversation about these issues that I find to be important. And because Russia and the US have a very strange friendship or relationship, as you could call it, it makes the work a bit controversial and overly political. So I decided that I couldn't just work in Russia and not work in the US. And that's why this year, and thanks to the Alexia grant, I'm able to keep working here in the US on the same kind of topics. And I find the parallel to be very interesting. So, like I said before, beyond politics, I also want to photograph youth and how they respond to politics. And in our current country right now, how are they responding to this kind of climate? And what does it mean to foster patriotic activity in kids in this kind of environment? I'm very curious to see what that looks like and how they're responding. And that's the topic that I haven't heard much about here or read about or even seen visually documented. And I think the benefit of having a visual documentation is that you have a direct link and contact. So not just reading articles or reading about these lofty terms, like we could talk forever about what it means to be patriotic or nationalistic, but seeing actual stories, hearing voices, hearing interviews, seeing what that visually looks like has a strong power and connection. And that's why I decided that I couldn't just work in Russia and had to do the work here as well. In the end, if I could just have a conversation about these issues, I'd be more than happy. I think an issue I see, and not just the United States, but every country, is that we tend to other people and to look at problems elsewhere instead of our own problems. And it's easy to justify our practices and ways of doing things while condemning others. And I think that's a really tricky position to be in. So for me, kind of similar to literature, I think it should always cause self-reflection. It should be more like a mirror instead of just looking in on someone's life. When I first published the work, I was actually shocked at the responses. Half of the responses were saying, wow, that's so terrible of them. They're going to take over the world. This is the worst thing. We hate Russia. The other half were saying, wow, the USA should do this. We used to be that great and now we're not. And for me, I didn't want either one of those responses. And it was so black and white that some were, either fear-mongering and using this as, a bit of propaganda against Russia, and the other half were using it the other way, saying, oh, we should start camps like this, our kids should be more patriotic. And I think I didn't expect that blatant black and white response. I was glad to have both opinions. I think you should reach both audiences ideally. But again, I wasn't expecting either one of those, and it was very conflicting for me as a photographer. To see how your work is being used in conversations and publications can be terrifying because you lose a lot of control. I don't want my photography or project just to be a look into someone else's experience. I want it to challenge us, to make us think about our own beliefs, our own ideas, our own sense of values, and our own country and communities. I think it should be more critical of ourselves than just simply criticizing the person I'm photographing or the community I'm photographing. So ideally, it would not create fear. That's kind of what I really want to avoid with work. I want it to create empathy and understanding. And like I said, I want it to be a critique of our own lives.